Sawadee Karp, hello and welcome to another Victor Black Masterclass video. In today's video, we're going to be talking about effective reps, and we're going to be talking about a rest pause. Now, for anyone that doesn't know, rest pause is a training methodology that's been around for a very long time, dates back to the 1940s. Every 10 years or so, some genius comes along and basically tries to rebrand rest pause training and for want of a better word, attach their brand to it so that it makes it look like it's something they've come up with, something they've invented. One of the motivations in making this video is today I was watching some content from this guy who was basically trying to rebrand effectively rest pause as something called plus sets. So over the years, there's been a number of branding attempts associated at connecting to this. Myo reps, most recently, as I said, this idea of plus sets. Dante Trudell's dog crap training. Dante's a decent enough guy to at least give credit where credit is due, and he recognizes that rest pause is not something that he invented or developed, as it were, and that it predates dog crap training by decades. Even Mike Mentzer was using rest pause, and Mike Mentzer didn't invent rest pause. So it's a very old training methodology, a very effective training methodology. I'm going to basically walk you guys through what effective reps means, what rest pause means, how does it really work, what's the underlying mechanism of action that makes it a successful training methodology. We'll talk about some of the pros and cons when compared to traditional training models, some of the pros and cons compared to drop set training, and how I would recommend you use effective reps, rest pause type training effectively. So let me just start by basically trying to give you an overview or an outline of how rest pause works. Basically, the idea of rest pause is that it's premised on a hypothesis that says, look, if you have a total number of repetitions in a set, let's say there's 12 repetitions in a set, that the first few repetitions in a set don't contribute in the same meaningful way or to the same magnitude as the final repetitions approaching a point of failure. So failure is really a common thread amongst rest pause type training. You are associating this training model with training to failure. So the premise is, the idea is, the philosophy is that the first few reps of a set don't contribute to the same magnitude as the final repetitions do leading up to a point of failure. And that is fundamentally premised on this idea of metabolite accumulation in the process. So the closer you get to the point of failure, the more impactful those reps are on outcomes than the initial reps in the set. That's the theory behind it. That's the concept. And it's a solid, logical, rational theory. How it works in practice is, let's say hypothetically we were to do a set of 10. Normally what we would do is then take a rest between that set and the following set of a long enough duration that you were fully recovered and then able to do, let's say, another set of 10, right, for a straight sets, and then you would recover, pick up the weights, and then do another set. So this would effectively be 3 sets of 10 as straight sets. So the rest pause model basically is premised on the fact that you would do a set of 10 and then put the weights down, but for a very short time frame. Short enough that you don't fully recover enough to be able to do a full set of 10. Let's say you can only do 5. But the premise then is that you're picking up at a point in a timeline that the 5 reps that you do are the tail end 5. They're not the first 5, they're the last 5. And so what you effectively create is this environment where you're getting 2 sets worth of value, as it were, 2 sets worth of stimulation from effectively 1.5 sets. That's the premise. So if you then put the weights down again, wait a short period of time and do another 5, effectively you're picking up 3 sets worth of training volume, 3 sets worth of stimulation towards hypertrophy, but not doing a full 3 sets. Okay, so that's the premise. There's a number of reasons potentially why you might do that, but quite bluntly, probably one of the primary reasons behind that is a significant reduction in total volume and a significant reduction in time that's required to train. So I'll talk a little bit in a minute about a comparison between something like drop sets training. The real value to drop sets training is it's great for time poor people. Do you know? There's not a significant advantage to drop set training in terms it doesn't produce higher hypertrophic outcomes. It's a way of producing very credible training stimulus in a very short time frame, and really that's one of the big things that are on offer here with in a rest pause type model. It's about getting a lot of good quality training done in a very short time frame. So before we move on too far, let me just also explain, as I said, over the years there's been a number of different brandings of rest pause. And I wanted to point out here that rest pause basically comes in a variety of flavors, as it were, right? So what it has in common is this idea that you are basically doing you do a set with a number, let's say 8 or 10 repetitions, and then you have a time interval that is a significant reduction of time over your normal recovery time between sets. And then you do a reduced number of follow-on repetitions, another potential rest, hence the term rest pause, and then another reduced set. Now, what's important to note here is that the time interval, right, has had a number of variations proposed over the years, and the number of repetitions that you would then use as a follow-on, the reduced number of repetitions, has had a number of sort of models proposed over the year. So the point being that if we kind of try to define, so what does rest pause mean? It's important to understand that there's a spectrum of valid and viable descriptions about what rest pause means. So right down at this end, I have a model that would look something like this, where you kind of do 10 repetitions. You wait 10 seconds as a rest. This is your rest period, 10-second rest period. Then you do another 5 reps. Then you have a 10-second rest period, right? And then you do another 5 reps, okay? I'm going to talk a little bit about some evidence in a minute from the research community about rest pause. Now, some of the evidence that was conducted or some of the studies that were conducted on rest pause actually changed the magnitude of these timing intervals to the point where they blew them out to something like 40 seconds. Okay, so you can see my point here is that rest pause doesn't mean a finite time where you do this, then this, then this, then this. What that is a variation or a branding of rest pause that someone's proposed. I'm more than happy for people to make an argument about what their personal opinion is on the ideal timing and the ideal number of reduced repetitions that you would follow on. That's fine, but understand that rest pause doesn't mean like a 10-second break. It means a shortened time interval, not long enough to recover. And anything that's not long enough to recover is considered a valid description for rest pause. Excuse me, I just have a quick sip of my coffee here. Okay, so let me go back to my main page. So that hopefully answers what rest pause basically means. It's reducing the time interval between sets in order to leverage this principle that all repetitions in a set are not of the same magnitude. That the repetitions at the later stages of the set are more effective, contribute more to hypertrophy, and that by compressing the time interval between training, we're basically eliminating the first repetitions in a set and getting more outcome for less work, as it were. That's the principle. Now, does it really work? Very interesting question. What does the evidence say and what does opinion say. So I think that anyone that has been around the training industry for any length of time can attest to the fact that there have been a great many training methodologies. I mentioned dog crap training by Dante Trudel before. It's probably the highest profile rest pause training program that's been out there for decades now, and they can attest to people having good outcomes on an anecdotal basis. But it's also important to understand that I'm interested in documented research evidence, and there is indeed a handful of studies, quite recent studies really, 2016, 2017, that are really looking at this concept of comparing strength and muscular adaptations of rest pause type training against traditional multi-set resistance training. And although there are varying results from these studies, I really think that the takeaway should be, and I'll talk probably in another video about some of these studies because they're interesting enough to, in my opinion, deserve their own video and break them down a little bit. But in a general sense, I think it's fair to say that the rest pause type training is at least as effective as traditional multiple set type training. There's no disadvantage to using rest pause type training in terms of creating hypertrophic outcomes. Now, some of these studies are going to propose that actually you get better results, but to be fair, and we'll talk about this in these following videos, the effect size, the differential between the two is fairly marginal. So I think what's more important is to understand for guys is that rest pause type training is at least as effective as traditional multi-set type training. So then that begs the question, potentially, why would you use it? And as I said, the obvious reason, going back to my previous statement, is when someone is time poor or someone doesn't want to expend a great deal of time and energy in the gym, then anything that we can do to compress our training time makes a great deal of sense. So one of the things that came out of these studies is that we were getting basically equivalent outcomes at significantly less training time. So if you were to spend an hour doing traditional training, you can get the same outcome in half that time, and that's really the leading advantage of this type of training. Whether it's drop set training, whether it's rest pause training, it's about collapsing the training time in the gym. Now, when do I like to use rest pause training? I like to use rest pause training when I'm dieting. Because when I'm dieting, I like to do the least amount of freaking work in the gym possible. I resign myself to this premise, this principle, this idea that I'm not going to grow when I'm dieting. It's not what I'm there for. I'm there to create a hypertrophic stimulus of a large enough magnitude that I don't go backwards, that I don't lose any size when I'm dieting. So I'm a fan of rest pause training when I'm dieting because it allows me to basically spend less time busting a nut in the gym when I'm on a low calorie count. So there is very definitely, in my opinion, a number of times that you can make a solid argument about when you would use a rest pause or a rest pause type training compared to traditional training. Let me just run through a couple of examples in no particular order. So as I mentioned, for myself, my preference is to use rest pause training when I'm dieting. Why? Because I spend less time in the gym, I'm doing less work, and I find it easier. The downside potentially to rest pause training is that ultimately it is failure-based training, right? And constantly training to failure, although it is an effective way of creating hypertrophic outcomes, does have a cost with due regard to our soft tissues, wear and tear and things like that. So it's not something that I would propose people use constantly, like year round. And it's one of the things I don't like about dog crap type training is it's a great way of building muscle, but it's bloody hard on the body. Anyone that's done it will attest to that fact. very effective way of, you know, putting on meat. You know, absolutely, 100% agree. If you do it for 10 years though, you're gonna feel the pain. Believe me. All right. So, and that's nothing specific about dog crap training. That is just a consequence of training with very heavy weights to failure every day, day in, day out. You know, there's nothing you can do about that. So my suggestion is that we use these type of training methodologies on an intermittent basis. You know, we rotate through them over time blocks in our training cycles, right? So, you know, when, as I said, when might guys potentially use it? I use it when I'm dieting. I don't use it year round. If guys are, you're in time poor, okay, great example. My suggestion would be that if you're going to use rest pause training over a long time frame, that fundamentally that you do this, and that is that you use rest pause just on the final set for a body part. So let's say hypothetically we're going to do chest exercise, and we're going to do 2 exercises for chest, and each of these exercises we're going to do 3 sets. All right, so we're going to do 3 sets for this chest part. We can do 3 sets for this part. It would be on this final set here that we basically implement a rest pause. Now, understand the downside to that is you're not picking up the full advantage of the time savings by doing that, but you're leveraging some of the benefits of rest pause and getting a small time advantage from the thing. But that would be my suggestion. If you're a fan of rest pause, if you like rest pause, if you like training to failure, then use it on the last set of each body part you're in. Or potentially you can use it more aggressively, but use it in a rotational way. In other words, do it for a period of time, then take a break. Do it for a period of time, take a break. Over the long term, over a long time frame, it is aggressive on soft tissue, joints, tendons, etc., like that. How does it compare to drop sets? Quite bluntly, in my opinion, it's probably very similar in terms of, you know, the outcome that you can create from drop sets. The advantage is you don't have to fuck around with changing, you know, weights. You don't have to have 6 sets of freaking dumbbells in front of yourself. You can use the same weight. You know, you have to be dropping plates and, you know, changing out dumbbells and, you know, moving pins and selector machines and things like that. It's not profoundly dissimilar, I would suggest, to something like drop set training. But the motivations behind it, the outcomes behind it, you know, and the way it makes you feel, probably very, very similar to drop set. You can draw a lot of parallels between drop set training, but in my opinion, it's at least as effective. Certainly, again, that is supported by the evidence that's available on the subject, but it's a little bit less work, really. So, you know, very comparable to drop sets in terms of efficacy. Okay, so let's talk about rest pause and, as I said, how I would potentially use it, and how I would, you know, make a recommendation that you use it in a periodized training model. I'm a very big advocate of periodizing your training. So let's take a quick look at a little graphic that I've basically drawn up here. And the premise of this graphic is that we are going to be seeking progressive overload. Always, 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 we need to be seeking progressive overload. So in this particular model, which dimension does that progressive overload come from? Well, fundamentally what it's coming from is we're going to be adding the rest pause component each week. So the first week, on week 1, we're going to drop a traditional set of 10 reps at a particular weight, right? To failure, train to failure on this set, okay? And then on week 2, we're going to basically do our 10 sets, put the weight down, wait for 10 seconds, pick up the weight, and do another 5 repetitions tacked onto the end of that. So that's our dimension of progression, adding those additional 5 repetitions. And on week 2, we're basically going to add another 5 sets. So 10 repetitions, put the weight down, a 10 count, pick up the weight, do 5 reps, put the weight down, a 10 count, pick up the weight, do 5 reps. And then on week 4, we're going to do that 3 times, and then we're basically going to deload. Okay, so we have this progressive overload over a period of 4 weeks, and then a deload, and then we pick it up and do it again. All right, and at week 6, what we're doing is we're then incrementally increasing the weight on the bar. Okay, so this is an increase in weight on the bar. So what this means is that the progression model for rest pause training in this periodized structure that I'm proposing here isn't premised on adding weight to the bar every week. It's premised on adding volume to your training by adding these additional rest pause sets. Okay, so there's many ways that you can periodize your training. Periodization is a very fancy sounding word, but basically what it really means is the modulation of training variables to help us achieve our outcomes. In this particular case, what we're doing is we're modulating the training variable, the rest pause, by adding a rest pause each week. The training gets harder and harder and harder, and then we deload in week 5, then we add more weight and we push up and we push up and we push up, with the intention being is arriving at an endpoint at 20 weeks where we're training with significantly more volume and significantly more weight on the bar than we did on week 1. Okay, so this is a one possible periodized model that you might look at for something like rest pause training. There's 101 ways to skin a cat. There's all sorts of combinations and permutations that one could potentially put together. And as I said, quite frankly, you're going to come across people. This is a little bit tongue-in-cheek. I've called this the Victor Black's rest pause model. You're going to come across people that want to brand things as their own and call it their own. These methodologies, these models have been around for a very, very long time. We're just getting better at understanding how they work, how effective they are. We're starting to get evidence that supports their use. And as I said, there's emerging evidence really in the last couple of years that does support the use of rest pause training. It shows that it's equally as effective as traditional set type training, but it basically, has the potential to bring with it a few benefits, and as I said, a few quirky things like the fact that we're constantly training to failure can be a little bit tough on older bodies. So that's it for today's video. Let me just quickly run through the list. As I said, what does rest pause mean? Hopefully I covered that. Does it really work? Absolutely. It's a very effective training methodology. This is supported both anecdotally and in the emerging evidence that's coming out. It compares very well with traditional sets. It's a little bit more aggressive on the body because it's constantly training to failure, but it's potentially a little bit more effective too. That's marginal. That could be argued. Certainly, it has a advantage in terms of for those with the time poor. And as I said, if you're going to use rest pause and you want to use it on a permanent basis, my recommendation is that you use it on the final set for each body part. Don't use it on every set year round, year in, year out, because it will ultimately take its toll. My recommendation always is that there is just a ton of great training models and methodologies that we can deploy. And if we rotate them, if we kind of use them judiciously and we deploy them over a time frame, that we have the greatest likelihood of longevity in our training practices, rather than smashing ourselves against the iron, as I like to say. Okay, that's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed that. As always, if you have any questions about rest pause training or effective reps, or any other question about training or nutrition or supplementation or performance enhancing drugs, feel free to ask them. And I look forward to seeing you at the next Victor Black Masterclass. Sawadee Ka.